Good morning and welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is messiness. Change, growth, transformation gets messy. It's only in the disrupting of old patterns that we can emerge anew. We've got to dismantle the old in order to usher in the new. Good morning, Rosalind. Welcome. Missed you yesterday. It's great to have you back, and welcome to everybody else who's joining us. And before we get started on our topic, let's take a minute or two to get present. So let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light, lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, all your molecules, your electrons, creating this brilliant beam of light and energy from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's press our palms together. Vigorously rub your hands together to feel all the sensations, the friction, the temperature, the motion, the pressure, and the tickling and tingling when you stop and allow all those sensations to bring you present right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables you to experience life. Well, welcome. So, messiness. Things get messy when you're in the process of transformation and healing. Oftentimes, we in the process of recovering go through in what we call a healing crisis. And that's when our body, in its efforts to cleanse itself, is releasing all kinds of forces to heal that leave us kind of depleted and maybe make us, as the body's purging itself of toxins, we feel run down, or we have flu type symptoms, or maybe we even are bedridden, as our body is clearing itself. And that happens with our spirit too, as we're disrupting old patterns. It's necessary to dismantle them. And in the dismantling, I don't know about you, but like in cleaning, sometimes you have to take things apart to find where all the nooks and crannies are. And there's all this disarray in the process of trying to get things organized and cleaned. And then you can kind of reorganize, reassemble things, but in a different way. And that's really what this process of change and transformation is. It's a process of restructuring. And in order to restructure, you need to frequently dismantle or level the old structure. And so there's this period of deep disorientation because we're in a space that's radically unfamiliar. And this is why it takes courage to be on a path of transformation. It takes courage to confront the unknown, to embrace the unknown. Rosalind says, when we fertilize the garden bed, both seeds of weeds sprout to the seeds and weeds, I'm thinking, sprout to the surface, along with growing stronger roots for the flowers. Yeah, exactly. So in order to I like the analogy of a garden a lot. In order um to grow in the garden, um I don't know if the analogy carries through in the way I'm going to speak it, but um what happens in the process of growth and transformation and moving toward wholeness is we get to pull up the weeds. We get to look for those things that are impeding the growth of the aspects of ourselves that we're wanting to flourish. And it's really interesting. This came about through a conversation with someone that I was someone I was speaking to about potentially becoming a client. And my experience with this person that I spoke to them was, it sounds like you're really committed to seeing the world the way that you see it, to believe that these patterns are that feel so fixed at the moment are always going to remain that way, that there's no option, um, that that things are never going to change. And I said, things can change. First of all, if you want to work together, I need to know that you have a willingness to allow things to change. And that means sometimes getting messy. It might mean overturning the apple cart, at least for a little while, so that you can see what's underneath all the apples, that look so pretty on the surface, but there's this stench coming off the cart. It's like you have to be able to turn it over and clear it out. And it was so interesting to me. And a credit to this person for being present to where they are. They said, not ready to do that, not ready to overturn the apple cart, not ready for that level of disruption at this point. And I think that so many of us opt for the same old, the same old misery. I have a client who used to talk about their favorite misery, but it's familiar. It's a familiar misery. It's a known, and so better the devil you know than the devil you don't, or the angel you don't, right? And that's the funny thing, is that we will opt for our favorite misery because it's familiar, and who knows what could possibly be on the other side. At least I know what this is. At least I know how to contend with this. And it does take a certain act of courage to be willing to upset the apple cart, to be willing to step into that space of not knowing, that space of uncovering what's there. So this same conversation, in a way, same conversation occurred with another client actually, who is willing to step into the unknown. And this is around an experience of grief and mourning. And this is a very um, high producing person. And they've been trying to schedule their grief over the loss of a loved one. And it's been about a year. And now what's manifested is a level of depression. And it occurs that the depression is a result of these unresolved emotions that were just sort of stashed away, that have been tunneling in and then deepening into this more pervasive experience of depression. And untetheredness, just sort of, I know that's not a word, but this sort of lack of direction and lack of motivation. And I think that that's a natural outcome of emotions that are denied or repressed or ignored. After a point, they show up in other ways, things that are calling to be addressed. Rosalind says, is the person's receptivity have something to do with will? Maybe the degree of suffering is so great, one is more willing to seek a new way. That now, Rosalind, that's a really brilliant insight, actually, is that it's when our pain is so extreme that we're willing to risk everything, that we will then step into the transformation. Pain is a powerful, powerful motivator. I think in my awareness, pain is a much more powerful motivator than pleasure or happiness. People will suffer with all degrees of pain, and then it can, once it gets to an extreme, that's when they will take the initiative to invite change and embrace change. And it's so interesting to me, this notion of safety that we have, is like, it's safer to stay with my misery because I know it, I know how to deal with it, than it is to upset the apple cart and step into this space of unknown because I don't know what's going to be on the other side. So back to the person with grief, the issue there was that they were afraid that if they stepped into the emotion, and it wasn't just this one incident, it was the lifetime of things that have been sort of repressed in their way. If they stepped into the emotion, that it would swallow them, the fear that they would lose themselves in the depression, in the sorrow, in the grief, in the spiral downward. And I can relate to that. There have been times in my life where I was afraid that if I let myself really be present to what was there, that I would lose my mind, that I would go crazy. And that was a deep, deep fear. And it was founded in not trusting myself and not trusting life, and feeling the magnitude of the emotion, the hugeness of this energy, this power that could be all consuming. And it brings me to another client conversation yesterday, which was their experience of this fire in their belly, and recognizing that this fire had power both to consume or destroy, or to light up the heavens, to light up the world. And having a fear around how they might manage this fire, or who they might be in relation to the fire. Would they be the expression that burns the world down or lights the world up? And that's also a scary thing. So, in this case, the messiness is moving from the small self that is trying to suppress the fire completely to the self that might be sparking it and getting singed a little bit here and there on the way to having that fire blaze in its brilliance as a light for humanity. So we are such interesting creatures. Isn't it true that we opt for the mundane so frequently, right? When we each have the capacity to be extraordinary, and in that extraordinariness, I'm not talking about it in context of any kind of competition or anything like that. I mean extraordinary in, oh, excuse me, extraordinary in the expression of our essential being, extraordinary in our engagement with life. Not so much, doesn't have to reflect in the doingness of life at all, but extraordinary in our engagement in life, our vitality, our willingness to truly be alive, rather than trying to survive life. Guess what? We don't get to do that, right? And so as we activate ourselves to engage in life, things get messy. When you're actively engaged, we stumble sometimes, we fall, we sometimes inadvertently injure others, and we get to self-correct, we get to work things out, we get to learn and grow through that messiness, stumbling our way to fuller expression. And that's the richness of life. Life is all of it. So yesterday we were talking about particle and wave, and this is a conversation that is really expanding in my mind quite a lot, thinking about ourselves, the way that we think about our identity as particle, like who I am, like it's fixed, like it's singular. And rather, what if we think of ourselves as a wave or a flow? If we think of ourselves as process rather than product, because product is an end product, right? It's something that's fixed. And in fact, our lives are process, really. And when we recognize our beingness, our identity as process, yes, there are certain things that characterize the particular river that we are, okay? Whether there are rapids or whether it's rocky, or what the shores are like or how wide the river is. But the thing is that the river is flowing, and it may have periods, it might have dry periods or whatever, but we are, I find for myself, as I'm playing with this notion of being process, that there's a much greater acceptance of all of life, all the lightness and the darkness, all the joys and the sorrows, all the shames and the triumphs, that all of those things become part of this greater process. And if we think of our life cycle, coming into being, into a physical manifestation, living through our lives, aging, dying, and then hopefully being reintegrated into the system. The messiness along the way becomes just part of this greater process. And it becomes part of a greater whole. And just thinking about that moves me so deeply. Like there's a very different sense of being and connectedness that comes from aligning with that space of being. And it brings us out of the doing into the being, into the thing, into the beingness that connects all the doing. The doing is the rocks in the river. And maybe, I'm just playing with these analogies, but connecting to that greater flow, not only of the river, but of all the bacteria and the fish and the other creatures that might be living in the water and near the water, and then the banks and the trees and the plants and the animals. And it's all part of this greater process. And as we expand ourselves, so I talk about, instead of letting go as Westerners, we're more acquisition oriented, and rather than letting go, if we can expand to include, then we become not any one of those things that we are including, but we become all of it. And in being all of it, we are no part of it. We are the entirety of it. Rosalind says, "Thank you for being a mirror for me to help me see myself from different vantage points, to love both the light and the dark. You give courage to turn over stones, rearranging the rocks to help to redirect flow." I love that, Rosalind. You're such a poet. That's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. And, it's funny, the emojis that you put here are a wave, a heart, and the praying hands. And interestingly, I'm a little nearsighted, so the wave looks like an arm. Funny, when I moved, you couldn't see me, but the wave looks like an arm, like showing a muscle. And being the wave is a strength, I think. Being process allows us to encompass it all, right? To leave space for it all. And all of it together is what makes it beautiful, is what makes it wondrous. And so particle and wave and messiness, I think embracing the messiness and the discomfort allows us to move into this other dimension of expression and being. And I encourage that courage. Without that courage, who are we? We become automatic. We become robotic. We become a shadow being, a shadow of who we could be. And so the invitation is to embrace the messiness and love it, just it's not to where the objective is not to find a place of order, to get everything in its place and keep it there. That's not the point, because hopefully it's ever changing. Hopefully it's a dynamic ecosystem. Hopefully it's growing and morphing and changing, and we have our periods of different seasons. To go back to the nature analogy, we have our seasons. And I had a couple conversations this week with folks about aging and having, looking in the mirror and saying, who is that old person? Like, it's not me. I don't relate to what I'm seeing in that mirror reflected. And we were talking about recognizing, using that, allowing that to be a reflection or a reminder that we're spirit in physical form, and that our physical form has been the vehicle. This is why it's so important. We start every day here with rubbing your hands together and being present to your physicalness. It's our physical body that allows us to experience life. And we get the range of experience from birth to death in our physicalness. And all of it, the wrinkles showing up, the aches and pains, the different experiences of life. It's all part of that magnificent flow. And it can get kind of messy. And there's richness in the messiness too. So with that, that's it for this morning. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection. And I go live here each weekday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page and YouTube channel. And I invite you to check out the other awesome programming on Enlightened World Network and Enlightened World Living. And as always, I'm so deeply grateful for the opportunity to look at life and look at ourselves in life, and hopefully create more expansive contexts for being. And until next time, so much love to you.